So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As you probably just heard, we are recording this meeting and the hope to post it up on the website. So, thank you again for joining us. For those of you that have been to the meetings in person back in June, this presentation is going to look eerily familiar to you because it's the same one that we've been giving. Just a little bit on logistics here for everyone that is attending this meeting. We're going to do the presentation like we did at the in-person meetings, and we're going to follow that up by a Q&A. For the Q&A portion, what we're asking for is for you to raise your hands, and as you raise your hands, you'll come up to the top of the attendees list, and some of us and someone will unmute you. We've got both City of Dallas, Camaro staff, and Zoe Communications here on the call to let us know that to help us kind of manage this meeting. One of the things we always say is that Dallas is a lot of people, places, a lot of opinions. Let's all please be respectful in terms of what's going on. We know there's a chat function. You're probably all familiar with it if you've been using Zoom. Generally, we're asking for questions to come through to us with raised hands, first and foremost. We would like to reserve the chat generally for just comments because there may be a lot of dialogue going on in there, and there's a very good chance that we'll miss that question that's in the chat. Once we get through the Q&A and kind of the in-person, or not in-person, but basically speaking with you, unmuting and muting, we will try and see if there's a little bit of time left for any questions that would kind of come up in the chat. So we'll let you know about that if we have time at the end. Again, the chat is really something we're using as a really a meeting summary to kind of understand comments and that you've been making in that chat. It is not the official written record. As we've been saying in all of these meetings, we're really asking for everyone to provide us with a written comment, whether that be through the website, and somebody here on our team will drop the website address into the chat. Basically, either through the website, you can either do the comment form there, you can also email a comment, and you can drop something off at the planning department if you want to walk on down and leave a comment there. So we really do, it's very important for us to have written comments so that we're very clear on, your opinion, what you think, what you want us to know, rather than the way these dialogues can go in a meeting. So we're taking notes, we're keeping track of the comments we hear, but we really want to make sure that we've got a written record of what you want us to know. And like I said, we will be saving the chat, but again, not formal, it's not, I'm sorry, I'm seeing a text here, not a formal record in that chat. Again, somebody will drop the website address into the chat there. And also we want to say that we're not going to be taking questions during the presentation. We've got to just kind of work through this and, get through the whole presentation. Following that, that's when we'll raise the hands, and we'll start answering questions, and you'll get to see my face as, we'll all come online and close down the presentation part of it. Okay, so with that, let's get started. Again, if you've been with us back in June when we were there, hopefully everybody's in a nice, cool, air-conditioned room. I know things got a little steamy in some of the places that we were at, but, let's get started with this presentation. So, okay. So, Dallas zoning reform, what are our goals? You see our tagline here, simple, clear, future ready. And really what we're trying to accomplish here is simple, making streamlined regulations that reduce unnecessary complexity so that it's really understood. And that's really what clear means, rules that are understandable by everybody, not just the specialists that work with the code on a kind of daily basis. And then future ready, designed for the Dallas we're becoming, not the Dallas of yesterday. And a lot of that, and you'll hear me say this again, is really related to Forward Dallas and the policies and goals that are articulated within that plan. So what are our objectives here? As I just said, Forward Dallas, implementing Forward Dallas, you've just been through this adoption process that articulates the land use goals and regulations and development desires that are happening into the future. So we want to make sure that the zoning code is supporting that. I think what's important to remember that is a comprehensive plan is just that, it's comprehensive. So there's a lot of things in there that don't necessarily relate to zoning. So this is one piece of the puzzle in the implementation. This is really looking at the regulatory objectives. We want to make a code that's easy to follow, so it's user-friendly, it's predictable, it's consistent, it's got graphics to help you understand what things mean. A key goal of Forward Dallas, new opportunities for diverse and affordable housing. And as we continue to develop to be sustainable and resilient as we move into the future, making sure we've got good objective design standards so that we ensure high quality development as it comes into the city of Dallas. Looking to reduce dependence on special approvals where appropriate, really to make sure that, things that we want to see can be easily applied for and move into development. And then finally, increasing the transparency of development approvals. And what's key there is that everybody understands what's being applied for, from the person submitting the application to interested neighbors and residents that want to see what this application is, to the official bodies that process these regulations. So we want to make sure that everything there is kind of clear for everybody to see. So the first thing and what we're here talking about today, and we have been talking about, is the code diagnostic. So what goes into a diagnostic? Well, the biggest part of it is, as you saw with the Camiro staff here, really us digging into the code and reading it and analyzing it and looking at what's going on within there. So that was a big part of that. We also had some meetings with technicians, really folks who work with the code on kind of a constant basis to get their opinions on how the code is functioning. And this happened way back in December 2023. Over 30 participants in that case, and really just looking at kind of what they see within the code that either works or doesn't work. Discussions with staff who work with the code. That is key to us. These are the folks that look at this code every day. We want to make sure that we're understanding what's going on in the code, what's working, again, what's working, what's not working, and how we can really help to improve, just even on a basic level, the structure. So a code diagnostic. So this is a series of proposals. We've identified current issues. We've looked at things in the current code and how they tie up with best practices within the zoning world. And then looking at things that are common special approvals. And so really understanding everything that's, kind of laying out the path that we think we can take. And so really we're presenting the concepts and the regulatory approaches that will set the direction for code drafting. So this is what we're here for. We want to gather feedback. Are our proposals good? Are there things we didn't think of? Are there other ways of doing things than what we've presented? So we really want to gather a lot of feedback. And again, just want to be very clear on this. The way we need to gather this feedback is through written comments. Again, through the website, through email, dropping something off at the offices. We really need to make sure that we clearly understand your position, and this is the best way for us to keep a formal record of this feedback. We did want to note this diagnostic, again, as a proposal and a series of concepts and regulatory approaches, is not going to be revised. It's intended to spur discussion and to get additional feedback on the things that we want to, that we're proposing within it. So let's dive right in. Your current code is a very big book, and it's kind of hard to navigate, and that's coming from someone who's worked with codes for over 25 years. So we think there's some very basic structural things that can really help to make the code easier to understand. I think first and foremost, a graphic orientation to really take a look at things and make sure that we're illustrating concepts, because, the words are what controls, but the graphics can really help you to understand. We want to make sure that everything's defined. This is key to minimizing interpretation. So we want to make sure that we've got everything that we need in there, kind of minimizing the way it can be interpreted. Measurement methodologies are key. We want to make sure we're consistent. The quickest example, that we're measuring building height everywhere the exact same way. So there'll be one section that kind of brings that all together. As an older code, over 40 years old, we want to make sure it's got a consistent voice. Different people have made different amendments to it. Some engineers, some lawyers, some staff, and everybody talks a little bit differently. And we want to make sure with a code rewrite, you've got one consistent voice, one consistent set of terms going through the whole document. Again, minimizing confusion and reducing interpretation. And then finally, we want to compartmentalize. And really, this is just the idea of grouping like with like. So we can see things grouped by their larger regulatory category and their purpose. You can see an outline there. It goes into a little bit more detail in the code diagnostic itself, which again is available on the Dallas Zoning Reform website. We want to basically, as a rewrite, we want to take in a reform, we want to take and create a new chapter. Chapter 63, which would bring together zoning and subdivision. And that's what you can see here in the proposed structure on the right side of the screen. There's a couple of articles in 51A, like we said, 63. Some have asked us before, why 63? It's just the first open number right now in the larger municipal code. So rather than making 51B, we're doing chapter 63. There's a few in 51A that are going to remain there that are not part of what we're doing as part of this project. You can see them listed here, things like parkland dedication, floodplain, thoroughfares, historic preservation, gas drilling and production. Those would remain in 51A. And so that's really kind of bringing this all together to create a code structure that's a little bit more intuitive than what's in place right now. So kind of the first big thing we wanted to talk about was uses. So really, to make sure that we can understand how uses work and what's allowed, we're proposing to move to a global use matrix. And you can see an example of that here. I want to be very clear, this is an example for the curious, as I've said before. This is from Hot Springs, Arkansas. And what you can see here is you've got two ways that you can access this matrix. So if I've got a piece of property in a district, I can go down the column and I can see exactly what types of uses are allowed. If I want to open up something, I can go across and I can see what districts would allow me to open my use. All the uses will be contained in here, all the principal and accessory uses. Becomes a lot easier to reduce any potential inconsistencies. When you have to add or modify a use, it's a lot easier. You're just touching it in one place in this table, making it very clear. And I think the other thing that's important is, as part of this use structure, every use that's listed in that column would have a definition associated with it, which again reduces interpretation. Some of these uses may have standards associated with them, just to make sure that they mitigate any negative impacts. So things like a car wash may have some buffering standards around it, just to make sure that the uses adjacent to it aren't being negatively impacted. So we're going to be looking at each of these uses and seeing which needs some standards. We want to simplify how uses are approved. This has been a bit of a contentious issue, but one of the things we wanted to look at is kind of how do you approve uses that aren't just permitted, the special ones. You currently have the SUP, the specific use permit. We want to maintain this. This is fairly common. We see this in codes all across the country. It's a good system. It's a way to really make sure that we're, addressing uses that need to get a little bit closer look. But you've got these other types of use permissions, the L limited uses, the DRI development impact review uses, the RAR residential adjacency review uses. And the intent there, we understand that they're again doing these things to control impacts. So what we're saying is that we can start to build that into the standards for those uses. So kind of taking the intent of these, but not creating these separate processes and building them into the standards for the use. One thing that is unique that we haven't seen elsewhere is that your current specific use permits are subject to renewal. This is very uncommon. We've made the proposal within the Code Diagnostic to eliminate this renewal period, and essentially to ensure that, we're being predictable as the use is coming in, it's being assessed as a specific use and it's appropriate for that area. And it doesn't create this unpredictable level of, well, hey, if I want to start this use, but I know it needs a renewal, in 2 years, that makes me feel uneasy and I don't necessarily want to do that. So we want to reduce that as well. With Dallas being a very big city, obviously, and a very vibrant place, we want to make sure that we're addressing the full range of uses that we can have in the city and make sure that we're articulating that we want them to come here. Things like artisan workshops, food truck parks, specialty food service, which is things like a coffee roaster, commercial kitchens. So just making sure we've got these kind of creator maker spaces accommodated within the code. In addition, we've proposed addressing current corner stores. Again, this is, as you read through the diagnostic, this is for those stores that exist right now that may be non-conforming. So essentially the district doesn't allow them, but they exist there. And to create a use specifically for those. So again, at this point, we've proposed to address the ones that are there. There's potential if you wanted to add new ones, but right now our proposal is looking at the ones that are there and adding standards around those that really mitigate their impact and make sure that they stay very local and very low impact to anything surrounding them. So into the heart of the beast, the districts. So we have some key proposals here for the districts. Many of these are just really kind of, I'll go over these and then we'll jump into these in a little bit more detail in a second. So one is just to simplify the single family and increase the conformance there. So these are the single family districts. The other is to create a set of gentle density residential districts that would basically allow for a little bit more housing diversity. Refining your current multifamily and townhouse districts, creating a set of commercial and mixed use districts that are based on an increase in scale and function, everything from kind of the neighborhood level to the regional level, allowing for more mixed use development throughout the commercial districts. I know basically the state of Texas is kind of taking care of that for us in a little bit with some of the newer legislation that's passed. Refining the industrial districts and making sure the special purpose and overlay districts address the specific needs that they're targeting. So diving into the first one, the single family districts. We did an analysis of these, and what we really looked at was the lot sizes to see how much conform. And in many cases, we see that the numbers in some of these districts are pretty good. When we look at things like the R1 acre lot size, currently it's 43,560 square feet. If we reduce that down to 40,000 square feet, what's typically called a builder's acre, we can increase the amount of compliance in that district, make more lots conforming, which would then allow for kind of for things not to be in that non-conforming status. We saw a good percentage in the half-acre districts, really those again, really meeting the development patterns there. That's really what this analysis was about. So maintaining those standards that are in place for that. Similarly, you've got the R75 and the R5. These are districts that, again, are meeting the standards. You can see there that, you know, the R75 is the majority of the city's single family. The standards there are working. But then we took a look at the R16 through the R10. So these are the 16,000, 13,000, and 10,000 square foot lots. Similar uses, these are single family districts. But what we think is we look at the number of lots that are in each of them and the levels of conformance, again, meeting the basic lot size of the district. We think there's a potential to consolidate these into one of a 10,000 square foot lot size, really brings up the number of lots that work. And the distinctions between them are relatively minor in terms of standards. So we think that this is really a good way to kind of simplify these and really address the development patterns that are present. We've also proposed to create a new R3 single family district. This would be a single family district of a 3,000 square foot minimum lot size, really intended for that small lot urban residential market. We came up with this because as we were looking at these lot size patterns, there's already 2,000 properties that are sitting at that 3,000 square foot minimum lot size. So really we see a potential for this. And the other one is to create a whole series of brand new gentle density residential districts. So these would be a set of new districts. I've been calling them parallel districts, and that seems to confuse folks, so I don't want to use that term anymore. But it'd be a whole set of brand new districts that allow for duplex, triplex, and quadruplex developments in addition to single family. These are districts we haven't looked at where they would go, but they're really the tools in your toolbox to accomplish what Forward Dallas talks about with housing diversity and affordability. So rather than having to deal with these on a case-by-case basis, your code would have a district that can address areas that are appropriate for moving into this type of district. Again, this would be a zoning map amendment, so this is vetted, and that you've got the standards in place for what you want to see there, rather than trying to come up with it on the fly. And so really we want to make sure that this code has all the tools that you need for the types of development that you may be anticipating. And again, we haven't identified areas where these would go just yet. That is a mapping process, which is later on, not part of this phase of the process. We looked at your townhouse and multifamily districts. Things seem to be they're very similar in both of these categories. So as we looked at the three levels of the townhouse district, you've got identical use permissions and dimensional requirements, but the density limits vary just by a little bit, 6, 9, and 12 per acre. We think it's easier to kind of consolidate these into one district, simplifying the controls to a minimum lot area per dwelling unit. So you can get a proper townhouse district that's very clear in its intent and the type of townhouse development you would like to see. In the multifamily districts, we saw that the base standards may be a little low. There's kind of a lot of reliance on affordable mixed income bonuses to make the project feasible. You've got four of them, the MF1 and the MF2. That's the whole range of things, everything from single family to multifamily. And then the MF3 and the MF4, which is higher density multifamily. So because they're very similar in these two categories, what we're proposing is to consolidate MF1 and MF2, make it a lower scale, lower density multifamily district, and then consolidate the MF3 and the MF4, which would be a higher density tier with form and scale controls to make sure that, buildings are being sited appropriately. You currently have a mixed income bonus. We had, as you can see in the diagnostic, have not proposed to eliminate that. For the commercial and mixed use districts, we want to go through a logical increase in scale and function. So we took a look at all the ones that are currently in place. You've got the office districts, as you're all probably well aware, and Zoom is a reminder, as we went through the pandemic, what we saw is that, office exclusive areas really aren't desirable. That they should be part of a more mixed use environment as the demand for office decreases. So really, we want to take the current office districts and integrate them into the appropriate other districts, which would allow for more mixed use opportunities. You've got the neighborhood service and the community retail, the NS and CR districts. So really kind of that local scale, making sure that we're allowing for appropriate mixed use development. Again, the state has kind of stepped into this as well. The RR district, this is your regional retail. This is large scale commercial, auto centric. These are car dealerships, IKEAs, Costco. Just making sure that we've got a district for these types of commercial areas and that the standards are appropriately tailored to those. Your mixed use districts have a whole series of these weird inflexible controls on the percentages of uses. Like you have to have a percentage of commercial, of office, of retail, of residential. Mixed use should be allowed to more organically develop. So we want to make sure that we're moving away from those kind of percentages and creating proper mixed use districts. Also, as we look at transit, we're proposing to create a series of transit-oriented development, or TOD districts, that really look to have standards that support transit use. But we understand that all transit areas are not the same. And so, we need to make sure we've got the appropriate levels of TOD developments in place. So everything from the very small scale, things that maybe need to be a little bit more smaller in scale, to things that may be more intensive, so that at least there's options that can more appropriately fit the area where the transit station is located. And then the central area districts, or the downtown. We want to make sure that we've got kind of the downtown centered within this code as, the area of the highest intensity, and looking at making sure the zoning districts reflect that, even though understanding, some of this is already within a PUD. But the way we looked at the downtown, or the CBD, is to create purpose-specific subdistricts. So you would have the core. As you move away from the core, which is the highest intensity, you would have the outer core, which starts to feather down a little bit till it finally goes into more of a residential mixed use along that outer core area. Now, it's not a perfect circle. That's not how, you can't just map things. You wish they were that easy and you could put them down like that. But, the intent there is they feather out as you start to move away from the core. Couple additional changes. If you're familiar with the code, you have these urban corridor districts with a lot of standards around them. They're very confusing and they've never been put on the map. So the intent here is really just to eliminate these. You have the kind of these strange multiple commercial districts that talk about commercial development with percentages of retail and personal service and office. It's a very outdated control, these types of required percentages. It can be very problematic. So really, we think the new district structure can accommodate these. And then finally, you've got the form-based district, which really look to create these higher levels of design, more sensitivity to surrounding context and each other. So we think, though, like we said, bringing design into the code as a whole, we could move away from the form-based districts and this kind of separate, almost alien approach that kind of is against what else is in the rest of the code, and create something that's far more cohesive and integrated, and bring districts in that address those form-based elements that are great and are working, and bring them out kind of to the commercial areas as a whole. The industrial districts, we want to refine the industrial districts to create a more predictable environment for industry as well as adjacent areas. So this is the structure that's been proposed. So we would create a new research and logistics district. This would be combining your current IL light industrial with IR industrial research to create this new research and industrial and logistics district. Really, this is where you see kind of larger scale research campuses. There's some light industrial, there's some logistics activities in place as well. Then renaming the IM Industrial Manufacturing into the GI General Industrial District. This is where things are of a heavier nature in terms of the use. They have more outside impacts. We understand from the meetings that we've attended back in June, there's a lot of concern about certain types of heavy industrial uses, and it's already kind of on our radar to continue to explore that and look at how these can be controlled. Are they in the right places? Kind of a lot of discussion around those. We want to create a new district, the Flex Commercial. And these are for industrial areas, light industrial areas primarily, that you may see transitioning into something else. So typically when you see these happening, what happens is the microbrewery moves in, or the doggy daycare, or the indoor soccer, and they start to mix with these other kind of industrial uses, and it creates these kind of cool, distinct areas. So we want to make sure that we have a district that can accommodate that, and that's really what we're looking at here. And then finally, you have the business industrial district. This is renaming it from commercial service. The reason for that is we want to be clear in the district name that, with the range of activities allowed within this district, the current CS, that it is industrial in nature. And we want to be sure that we're clear about that and that the standards that we refine for this district reflect that. You've got a whole series of special purpose and overlay districts. So really, you've got 3 current special purpose base districts that we have. Our recommendation is to maintain them. They serve specific purposes. That would be the agricultural district, the manufactured home district, and the conservation district. So really maintaining those. Couple of new special purpose districts, and what we mean by these are base districts, they're not overlays, would be to create an open space district for, larger public parks or larger natural areas. However, we would allow parks throughout all districts. This is really to create a district that addresses kind of those large areas of open space recreation or natural areas. And then the institutional district. This is taking your current ID district, your institutional overlay, and creating it into a base district so that we can look at the standards for how these kind of campuses develop. So these would be things like government campuses, university campuses, healthcare campuses, really making sure that we're being very sensitive about the edges of these campuses, but a little more flexible once you get very much internal to how they're operating. In terms of the overlay districts, we want to maintain the current overlays. You can see them listed here, everything from historic to Turtle Creek to neighborhood stabilization. A couple of them that we've proposed for potential elimination, parking management. I believe this is related to the form-based districts that would just get integrated, plus you've done this whole parking reform. And then we've made the proposal to consider eliminating the ADU overlay and more broadly allowing ADUs as a use within the residential districts. The issue with the, making sure that we're building standards around ADUs and when they can be located and how big they can be, where they can go, what can happen, making sure that we're, building in safeguards around those. But that is a proposal, and it's got supporters on one side and folks that really don't like it on the other side, but it's something we want out there for discussion. And then just very quickly, you have some legacy districts. These are overlays. They basically cannot be right now. You cannot apply for these. We just need to keep them on the books. Mainly it's a bookkeeping thing, but none of these can be used currently. And just kind of as a heads up, we would just be keeping them so they're identifiable. So a couple of district controls that we wanted to update, looking to create mainly a distinction between yard and setback. You can kind of see that illustrated there in that bottom graphic. So the setback really is the minimum dimension that the district requires. And the yard is the actual dimension once the building goes on the lot. So for example, your front setback may say you have to be 20 feet back, and that's the minimum required. but you choose to set your house 30 feet back, which means your front yard is now 30, your yard is 30 feet, your setback is 20. The reason it's important to make this distinction kind of once you wrap your head around it is because certain controls within the ordinance talk about things being allowed to locate either in a setback or in a yard. And if we say, for example, this is one I've always been using, if you have to find somebody who wants this, but swimming pool in the front yard on just a typical single family lot. People don't want, if you say no swimming pool in the front setback, but your house is set back further and your yard is bigger, you could still move it in there technically. So we want to make sure that we've got that distinction in place so we can control things like accessory structures and where they go on the lot. For the single family districts, we want to regulate the front setback by including an averaging provision that would kind of look at the block face that the houses are sitting on, really to just make sure that we're maintaining the rhythm and the pattern of that existing area. That's what the benefit of a front setback averaging allows you to do. Kind of keeps the houses in line, creates that kind of nice flow down the block. And so this is a way to achieve that. We want to be really specific on things like interior side and rear setbacks, where they are, what those dimensions are. Similarly, for our corner side, that would be the side yard abutting a street, making sure we're very clear on where those are and what those dimensions are. And then finally, clarifying controls on building coverage and adding in a new impervious surface maximum. The building coverage is the one that controls kind of the volume of the structures on the lot, your principal building, freestanding accessory structures. The impervious surface controls all of the paving, and it's a key control for stormwater. So there's somewhere on your lot for stormwater to be absorbed, and impervious surface maximum is kind of how you get at that. A couple of other things, we want to measure building height in feet, not stories, where possible, just because, let's be very clear on how tall we want buildings to be. As we said before, kind of looking at the maximum building heights for multifamily and non-residential districts. Kind of a big one that you've probably heard if you've been following the process, that we've proposed the elimination of the residential proximity slope, the RPS. Really what we want to do there is kind of create different contextual controls. We haven't worked those out yet. We're still continuing to kind of look at the various ways that these can be controlled, but essentially we understand there's a sensitivity between single family and much taller buildings being next to single family. So we want to make sure that we create something that's, number one, easy to follow, and number two, still continues to get at maintaining that sensitivity. Looking at controlling development by lot area rather than dwelling units per acre. It's kind of more precise, really allows you to understand kind of what goes on in the development. Eliminating FAR, which I think is used throughout. FAR was something created for skyscrapers, really kind of bringing it down to, some of these lower structures is really not as effective as other things like setbacks, building coverage, height controls, things like that. So making sure that we're using those to create the right kind of development envelope. And then again, I mentioned this before, but design standards within most of the districts. So got through the two big ones. So like I've said in the meetings, we're kind of we got to the top of the hill and now we can kind of more leisurely stroll down the other side. So general development standards, want to make sure that we're looking at a variety of things that happen on a lot aside from the principal building. Things like a site triangle, which is really kind of looking at the corner and making sure no structures are in there to impede the vision of pedestrians or drivers, so that pedestrians and drivers don't unfortunately meet. We don't want that to happen. How fences are controlled, where mechanical equipment can go, where things like dumpsters can go, making sure we're addressing all of these different things. Including some exterior lighting controls. I think the importance here is really to minimize glare and light trespass. So really ensuring that, we've created a series of standards that would be easy to administer, but would work to prevent things like light pollution. And then finally, accessory structures. So really creating general standards for their height, their location, their size, but then really in some cases getting a little bit more specific with very specific types. So things like where a detached garage can go, how are apiaries handled, personal solar and wind, what are the regulations for those kind of special types of accessory structures. One of the things here, you'll kind of remember, we talked about yard versus setbacks. I think it's kind of it looks very simple. And again, this is not Dallas, this is Palos Park, Illinois, is really looking at kind of permitted encroachments into required setbacks. And what you have here are a series of architectural features that we would allow to encroach a certain distance into some of the setbacks. So things like balconies, bay windows, eaves. As you can see in this table, sometimes it's a yes, sometimes it's a no, that it can't encroach into that setback. And then you see also there's certain controls about how much it can encroach. The value of this is it creates architectural interest in all buildings. So rather than if I wanted to do something nice with a bay window or a fancy chimney, I don't have to keep setting my building back, which may discourage me from doing it. A little bit of leeway, a little bit of flexibility allows for these features that make things look nice, quite frankly. So really, allowing for a front porch, allowing for a bay window to give that interest on these buildings as they come into development. We know you've all been through parking reform. This is a relatively new ordinance that you've approved. It says here currently undergoing an update, but we haven't changed the PowerPoint, so it's been updated. So on our end, what we'll be doing is taking all the work that was done for parking reform and integrating it into the larger code update. On our end, what we'll be looking at is making sure it aligns with the rest of the code. Not really looking to make any substantive changes to it. It's really just more of an alignment and just, making sure all the work that was done continues to translate into the code and work well together and consistently. Landscape, we know, also not as recent, but recently updated. And again, our general approach to the landscape section is more of an alignment to making sure, again, it's working with all the rest of the code. We do want to make sure as we're looking at landscape, because it does have a little bit of time on it, is that certain specific areas of a site are being landscaped properly. So things like a parking lot perimeter and the interior of the parking lot, you can see that in that graphic example there. Where we have buffer yards, making sure that the buffer yards are appropriately planted and that they're accommodated, the sizes match with the transitions we're trying to control. And then things like for larger developments, perhaps even building facade landscape. So we'll be taking a closer look at landscape, but again, kind of working within that alignment framework. For signs, a couple of things we need to do. Number one, just based off a series of Supreme Court decisions, we have to make sure that signs are content neutral, that we are still able to distinguish on-premise versus off-premise, which is basically in simple language, typical sign versus a billboard. So we still can make those controls. And then commercial versus non-commercial messages. We want to reorganize the sign regulations to make them really kind of easy to follow. So you can see here a proposed reorganization, a purpose, general sign standards, prohibited signs, signs that don't require a permit, signs that do require a permit, and your fantastically named current provision of extraordinarily significant signs. We typically call these classic signs. Our name is boring. This name is fantastic and needs to be maintained. But it's great to keep these signs that contribute to the history of Dallas and, be able to find a way to keep them kind of going to allow their character to kind of enhance the city. You do have a whole series of special provision sign controls. These are basically mini sign codes for certain geographic areas. These have been approved. These are on the books. They are, in a sense, vested. We're not proposing to make any changes to those. Honestly, we really can't. So what we're proposing is to take these and move them into an appendix on the current code, just so they don't overwhelm the sign chapter, because as you look at the sign chapter, you would think that everything requires one of these when it really shouldn't. So these are just, they're being maintained. They're just kind of being moved around to continue their role in the kind of back part of the code at the appendix. We want to look at a kind of a new approach to signs, which ties into everything we've basically been talking about. You currently organize signs as attached versus detached. Without going into kind of these specifics, as you see here, you see these specific sign types. You can really overlook important context. You can get signs that are out of sync with the way a district looks. So what we want to do is really regulate signs by the specific type and by the district, so that we're always matching the district form and maintaining a more consistent visual character within those districts. So some districts may allow certain signs, but not others. Some districts may allow, you may have multiple districts that allow for a certain type of sign, but the size difference. But there's a difference in size between those districts. And that's really just so we can kind of bring everything, as we're bringing design standards in, as we're bringing, district form standards in, signs are working in concert with all of those as well. So finally, administration. We want to clarify the administrative process. So it'd be kind of these 4 articles that you see here, kind of who does what, how do I do it, what happens once I've done it. So really just laid out within those different application procedures and the different approvals. In many cases, a lot of administration comes down through the state, but there are some things that we've made some recommendations on. The first, you currently limit the types of variances that can be applied for, which is kind of antithetical to what a variance is. A variance is meant to anticipate something. It's meant to be a release valve for something nobody could anticipate. So kind of putting limits on what you can't anticipate is kind of counterintuitive. So essentially same process, same standards, everybody, you're doing it all, but you're basically allowing for any types of variances to come up. Another thing is the administrative modification. We've proposed this new process, which would be a way for the zoning administrator to approve some very small modifications. Oftentimes it's called a minor variance or a baby variance in shorthand. Essentially, we would set very clear thresholds of what counts, what doesn't. Here's an example. Many places use a modification of 10% or less to any dimensional standard. Really just meant to get things like I need a foot difference on a setback. Rather than going through the full variance procedure, there would be this kind of this lesser procedure of the administrative modification. Oftentimes these have notice attached to them as well, but it's a smaller radius. It's basically just your next door neighbors letting them know what's going on with this, that they can protest. If anybody does protest it, it gets automatically kicked up to a variance. But it's really a way to kind of ease kind of looking at these very small things that happen that just need a quicker process to be taken care of. We're going to continue to look at site plan review kind of as we've, you saw the DRI and the development impact review, the residential adjacency review, those kind of tie into site plan. Those are under the use approvals. What we want to do is just take a look at site plan as a whole, and let's create a clear set of triggers for site plan. And that could be by certain types of uses, by district, by the development size, by alteration and expansion of existing developments as well. Finally, subdivision. Generally, your process is a fairly typical subdivision process. You do have this one, thing in here that is very unique, and that is not something we typically see. That lots must conform in width, depth, and area to the pattern already established in adjacent areas, having due regard to the character of the area. This is very atypical. For subdivision, it's an administrative process in which you are looking at whether or not the proposed division of land matches the district standards of the district that it's sitting in. And that's really all it is. It's really just meant to see, are the lots I'm creating matching what the district says I can do? The way this language is written, it's vague, it's subjective, it's open to interpretation. What is conforming? What is having due regard? This kind of subjectivity can lead to an inconsistent application of the subdivision regulations. It leaves room for bias or arbitrary decisions. There's a risk of legal challenges because of its vagueness, and uncertainty for folks that are coming in to do, a subdivision application, understanding that this could, if I'm meeting the district standards, but is that even good enough? And we don't want to have that uncertainty in place. Dallas and plan development. Wow. 1,200 and counting. The city is currently relying heavily on plan development, which can create an unpredictable development environment. There's nothing inherently wrong with PD or plan development as a zoning tool. It was created to allow for unique and innovative developments that people couldn't think of, that districts may not be able to accommodate. Basically looking at it as a way to kind of modify the base zoning as needed to allow and facilitate these types of things that are unique and innovative, just to say it again. But what's happened in Dallas over time, they've moved beyond this original intent. They've become the way that you do zoning almost by default. They're serving as a workaround. And what that tells us is something that we see is that the current code isn't working. It's filling in the gaps in an outdated zoning code. It's trying to address uses that aren't properly regulated within the code. It's just becoming the way that you do zoning, which is a very difficult situation to be in. costs time and money for the city, for developers, for any folks that are interested in what that PD is and are trying to follow it through the process. It's not a simple process. It's not a quick one. So really, it's just taking everybody's time. It can be frustrating and inefficient because the outcomes are constantly changing because you can constantly modify the PUD. And in particular, it makes zoning enforcement really complex because what you have to think about is each of these PDs function as a mini zoning code. So something that you think is in violation of the zoning could in fact be allowed by the PD, but you don't know that, the administrator doesn't know that until they have to go and dig all of this up. So really, in order to create a more consistent enforcement environment, a defensible code, it's really to reduce this reliance on PDs. I do want to be very clear here. Current PDs that are in place are vested. We don't have the power to take them away. And so essentially they will be maintained. So the 1,200 you've got and however many until this code gets adopted are the ones that they're gonna remain in effect. They are vested. We're not taking them away. We're not even proposing that. So how can we solve these issues? Well, I think really everything we've talked about to date is one of the things that, we really gets at reducing this reliance on plan development, making a district and a use structure that's more responsive to the Dallas of today, and ensuring that we've got the districts and things to create this, more predictable environment. Taking the conditions that you're always applying to PDs and turning them into zoning code standards so that everybody's subject to them. And then again, a few more administrative flexibilities, like things like administrative modifications, which is really there intended to be, rather than using PD as a workaround for a lot of variances, you've got these other options. What we wanted to say, one of the things we wanted to consider an alternate approach to plan development. PD right now is treated as a district. What we've made the proposal to do is to treat it as an approval procedure. So really it would be an approval that lies on top of an existing zoning district. So the underlying district standards apply unless the PD modifies them, which is similar to the way it is now. But this creates a little bit more predictability. You could always see what the underlying district is. The approval lays on top of that district. If the plan what's one of the key things here, if that approval expires, basically you haven't acted on it, it's just been sitting there. If it expires, it just goes right to the district that's already in place. And it's clearly working off a base, which makes the negotiations, which is that base district, which makes the negotiations clearer for everybody. So finally, nonconformities. We want to make sure the rules are clear for all the different types of nonconformities. We're doing our best, as you could see when we kind of talked about the single family lot sizes and things like that, trying to find ways to reduce the number of nonconformities within the city, but a city is too big and too complex to ever get rid of all of them. So we want to make sure that the rules are in place for all the different types of uses that are nonconformities that are out there. And this is things like uses, structures, lots, signs, and a new one, which would be the nonconforming site characteristic. So if we've got exterior lighting that doesn't conform to any of the standards that we put in place, or some of the parking, or some of the landscape that's required, rather than put the whole structure in nonconforming status, we can address that one characteristic and create ways for that to come into conformance without burdening the structure, which may be perfectly fine and meeting all the district requirements. So it's really just a way to kind of refine one more element of nonconformities. We've also proposed in the diagnostic a potential new permission, and this would be for single family and two family or duplex, where there may be a non-conforming side or rear wall of an existing home as of the existing date of the code. And say somebody is a one-story ranch and they want to put a second story on, but their rear wall is a little bit too far into their rear yard. So long as they meet every single other requirement of their district. So this doesn't address, you can't violate the height or the building coverage or any of the other setbacks. We would allow you to build in line. So this is basically, rather than having to get a variance for that wall going up, or having to set it back, which can create some odd looking houses and it can cost significantly more. this would just allow you to build in line, meeting every other district requirement. There's no other flexibilities provided except for that. What we've seen, we've been using a provision like this for, many years now. And what we've seen is this is a way to allow for existing housing stock to be able to make some improvements to it to keep it going. So essentially it's not torn down. It basically allows for a little bit more room, whether it be kind of a little bit of a second floor or a little bit of a mud room in the back. Allowing for that to happen so that housing stock is maintained. It keeps older houses viable, allows them to continue through this kind of easier process, and really we see it benefiting in that way. Again, subject to all the other district requirements, it's just basically exempting from a variance. A permit would be required, building permit would be required. You're not getting out of anything else. It's just basically creating a difference for the variance. And so with that, again, just to show the website, which I'm sure I can't see it, but I'm sure one of my colleagues has thrown into the chat maybe a couple times, DallasZoningReform.com. You will find the diagnostic on there. You will find this presentation on here. We hope to, if the recording went well, that we'll be posting this webinar on there. We'll be doing this tonight, same webinar at 6 p.m. as well. Just to make sure we put that up there. So as everything comes up there, that's where we're going to be throwing everything onto the website. And so with that, we would like to open things up to Q&A. We got about 45 minutes of Q&A time left. And so as I said before, what we'd like to do is raise hands within raise your hand and we will call on you, unmute you to ask the questions. In the chat, again, we would really like to reserve that for comments that you would like to put for the meeting. If we have time at the end here, we'll go back into the chat and see if there's some questions in there, but really we're going to focus right now on everybody raising their hands, just like school. So really appreciate everybody meeting with us this morning, and I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera on and join my colleagues here and take it away, guys. Oh, and I should say, just to say, we've got Chris and Mitch here from Camiros, as well as Frankie from Zoe. Whoever's helping me, help me. So.
Okay, we're going to start with our first raised hand here. And they should be able to talk. I think they need to unmute themselves. They had raised their hand at the beginning. I'm not sure if they are intending to still have their hand raised.
I believe it's Vijay Opa.
I think your computer's muted. Maybe while that gets figured out,
okay.
Next vote.
Yep, we'll move on to the next and maybe circle back to that person. So we have Karen Roberts. If you want to unmute, you can ask your question.
Good afternoon, and thank you. In the very beginning, you discussed that how we can send in questions, and you want our input, you want our information. But I also am very aware, as you said, you met with 30 stakeholders in 2023. I've looked at a list of that I understand were the stakeholders. I see no one that is, from my perspective, a strong neighborhood advocate. And, our experience with Forward Dallas, we had our meetings, and our comments were ignored. In fact, when asked what was our response, the planner said, well, I can't speak for them, but they're misinformed. So I want to know, are you planning to have some sit-down meetings with what I would call neighborhood representatives and maybe other groups that have strong concerns about these things too, where we just sit and ask questions and communicate. These meetings, which I certainly appreciate, you answer our questions and then we got to move on. It's the next question and there's no holding. My other question is, in the beginning, you also made reference to this being related to affordability in Forward Dallas. Forward Dallas ended up eliminating affordability as part of what went into that. They had to admit that the Forward Dallas plan does not include affordability. So can you tell me how this code is going to address affordability? And thank you again.
Okay. So just to address the first question regarding the stakeholder meetings, our intent there was a series of listening sessions in which we talked to folks that use the code. It was really done on a more technical level. We've heard your comment. We've heard your comment from others as well. And we're continuing to explore ways to see kind of how we're going to kind of help to rectify that. I don't have the answer to that question yet, what that process will be. But everybody has been heard on that point, and we're taking it very seriously. In terms of Forward Dallas and issues of affordability, I think from our end on a zoning scale is really looking at more so the idea of housing diversity, making sure that there's a variety of ways for folks to find places to live. We know that there is just ongoing throughout the country, and Dallas is no different, affordable housing crunches. So that's just kind of a bigger policy issue. I think one of the things here from a zoning perspective is what we're looking at is creating at least the tools to create diverse housing. With diverse housing, there's opportunities for affordability. So that's really what we're looking at in terms of that. Okay. Next up.
We don't have any other raised hands right now. So guys, again, if you do want to ask a question, make sure you raise your hand and we can give you permission to talk. Okay, we have Dallas Colthram here.
How are you going to, hi, it's Dallas, from Dallas. How are you going to address, like they did in 1989, and assign people what zoning district they're in? Because there's never been a time since then that master plan consultants hasn't been working on cleaning up problems from the previous transition period. So the people on this call will probably take attention to what their new zoning is, but there were lots of people who went from I-2 to IR and lost rights. How are you gonna assign it? And then I think this predates me, but I remember my dad, it seems like they divided the city into four quarters and worked on them over time. How's that going to happen? Because there's a lot of pieces of property owned by a lot of people.
And my answer right now is we don't know. We know that the zoning map is the second component of this, and that where districts go on the map, if they go on the map, is a key discussion and a key thing that we need to work on. We don't know that yet. Right now, what we're trying to do is really take into account kind of looking at the things that are out there, the policies of Forward Dallas, the things that are needed, and making sure that the text supplies all the different tools that we need. And then we'll be crossing that bridge kind of at a later date. So we understand your concern. I know it's a big thing. It's a big task. We'll be looking at kind of how to handle it kind of a little bit later on. Right now, we're looking to see if we can get all of the different districts and tools and standards and uses and everything that we need in the code to tackle that later. Okay.
Okay, up next we have Kara Mendelson. Apologies again if I mispronounce any names here.
Yes, that's all right. So I have a question for you about two comments you made. One of them is the second story without a variance.
Mhm.
So if it's a ranch house and that second story will impact the privacy of the home behind it, are you saying you're just allowing this by right? There's no consideration of the other property owners?
Well, there's kind of, it's a little bit of a complex answer. So I'm hopefully I can keep it as keep it understandable. So,
Well, I don't know. Wait a minute. The entire idea of this zoning is about making things simple and clear.
right.
So if you can't describe it in a simple and clear way, there's a problem here.
No, and that's not what I meant.
Okay.
Really what I meant here is there's kind of two things at play within this. So if somebody were to put a second story on their home, just using that example, it's not always a second story, but saying it's the second story without a variance, because they're a little bit too far into a rear or a side setback. Everything they're doing would be, the rest of what they're doing would be have to meet what the district says. So it would be things like the height, kind of any kind of design standards that would factor into kind of the outside of the home. So they don't get exempt from any of that. The principle is either somebody could tear down their home and build a two-story home, meeting all the district standards, and you end up in the same situation. This is really to allow for those existing homes a little bit more flexibility, to create some improvements to extend their lives. So if a district doesn't allow a second story, this whole without a variance thing is moot because you can't do it anyway.
So basically, people will lose their privacy if an established neighborhood is mostly ranch, but not required to be single story, and somebody wants to build a second story overlooking somebody else's backyard.
I mean, there could be that potential for, the perception of privacy being lost, but at the same time, that home could be torn down and rebuilt as a two-story building.
Okay. So my second question is about a statement you made that this plan is not for the Dallas we are, it's for the Dallas we are becoming. And who is it exactly that is deciding the Dallas we are becoming?
So really what we're talking about there is the policies that get established by the city. And the main one, the kind of newest one that's been established, where zoning does take its foremost guidance from, is Forward Dallas. And so really Forward Dallas, as the name implies, as everybody's kind of, very invested in this plan, is talking about what Dallas is going to be like moving into the future. And that's what's intended by that statement, is that it's supposed to be, number one, it should be a code that takes advantage of, all the best practices and most modern things within zoning that just make it easier to understand. But from a policy perspective, zoning doesn't make policy. We are drawing from Forward Dallas.
Well, it's funny because all through Forward Dallas, everybody in the planning department would very, very clearly state that this was not a zoning document. And so now I love how it's being called that, to inform what you're doing. And as a city council member, I voted against Forward Dallas, so I have a lot of problems with what you're saying. The last thing I'd say is, you mentioned that the office use district should go away and that it should only be mixed use. And why is that exactly?
Really what we're seeing is less and less of a demand for just office only zoning, just
But if
because,
somebody wants to only have office, shouldn't they be allowed to?
I mean, the district would allow for the full range of uses if they wanted to build a development that was strictly office. It's not a requirement that it be mixed use. We're talking about the district, that it would be allowed within the district to have a variety of different uses. If somebody wants to build an office only development, there's nothing in this code that's going to stop them from doing that.
But you literally use the words only mixed use. And if you go back on the recording, you'll see that.
Yeah, and
So that's
and perhaps I
problematic.
misspoke, but what I meant was to create districts that I meant from a larger district structure perspective, that the districts would all be mixed use. And quite frankly, it comes down from the state too, to allow for this mixed use development within commercial. A development, none of that means that any particular building that's being built or a development site that's being development has to be mixed use. It can be exclusive to one use. We're just talking about a district that limits the uses allowed within it to just one thing, like office.
Well, that's fine if people want to have mixed use, but they also should be able to have exclusively office, and your presentation of it indicated that you would not be supportive of that. In fact, you literally said you only want mixed use. I wrote down your quote. So
Mhm.
I think that's a problem. So the last thing I'm going to ask about is the gentle density districts. How will one determine if they will remain a single family district or a gentle density district?
At this time, what we are proposing is to create the general density districts, whole brand new set of districts, in addition to everything else that's in the code, to basically make sure you've got the tools for areas that want to transition. We've not done any zoning map analysis. We have no areas that we currently know of that would be transitioning into these. It's basically to make sure that we have the tools available for areas that would transition into the future. Like we said, the map is kind of the second component to this. And we don't know where things are going on the map, again, if they're going on the map right now at all. But just to make sure that the code has those districts for when areas transition or want to do that, or say there's new areas of development that come in that want to use that those districts are already available, and the way we want to see them develop is already laid out in the code.
So you're not proposing that any will switch to be this gentle density district?
We have not made any proposals on the zoning map and switching any of the single.
And is that a step that's anticipated?
I quite frankly, I don't know. I mean, from our end, we knew that there's, a significant amount of, concern about single family. We wanted to make sure that we had those single family districts. We've not proposed to eliminate those, really just to make sure that they're good functioning single family. I don't know if anything would switch.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Okay, thank you for your questions. And again, if you want to ask any questions or say anything, make sure you raise your hand. Give a second here. We have a hand raised, but they've already spoken, so just give a minute to see if anybody else wants to say something. Okay, we have two more hands. We have Raquita Street.
Yes. Hi, my name is Raquita Street, and I live in the Owenwood district. I have two questions. One is about parking management. I heard that it was going to be eliminated. Is it going to be replaced with anything? Because parking is a huge problem. And my second question is, as far as, because where I live, it's half industrial, has half residential, and our residential was added on by Mount Auburn when they were going through their reform. And so I was just wondering if it would or possibly change the area around us, because we still have like an old Ford plant, and we do have a dairy over here, and they're building more industrial behind us off of military. So I was just saying, is that going or could possibly affect our neighborhood as it stands at the moment?
Okay, so a couple things on the parking management issue. What I'm referring to there is that you have a very specific parking management district that I believe is tied into some of the form-based districts. I'm not talking about like parking management as a city department. That's not what we're doing here. It's really just one specific parking control that I believe has already been kind of even addressed within the parking reform. So we know parking's an issue. Any kind of, parking management from like a citywide level at a city department level, we're not part of that. Regarding the area that you spoke of, part industrial, part residential, kind of again, as I've said, we're looking right now to draft the text and create the districts that we need. We don't know if there are any changes coming to any areas. We have not gotten to the point where we know of anything happening with the zoning map. That's kind of a second, almost third phase down the road where we start to look at, okay, we've got things in place. Do certain districts need to change? We don't know the answer to that yet.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're gonna have Ryan, Tony, and then Karen will get to you next.
Hello, my name is Brian Tony. I'm the executive director of the Dallas Housing Coalition, comprised of 320 community-based organizations and individuals in support of more attainable housing. We also supported Forward Dallas's official adoption by our city council. I think it is important to still keep it in mind as our land use vision. There are, several components of it that spoke towards having more housing allowed throughout our city, and especially in our transit-oriented development areas. I think that there's opportunities for more transition zones, allowing more height and allowing more different types of uses on corner lots, arterial roads, and the like was a broad consensus of our city council. And then also the community residential place type spoke to having both attached and detached single-family homeownership opportunities like duplexes and townhomes throughout our city. So, looking at that map and taking the adopted city policy into these zoning reform discussions, I think is still highly relevant to today's conversation. My question for you all as a consultant here, in other cities you've looked at, when they have allowed more uses, on an underlying zoning, does that automatically mean that you've seen more mixed uses or automatically taken advantage of? Or is this something that there would still be years for the development in those cities to catch up, and that it's just simply providing an option for people if they wanted to build a different use or have a different retail option than they currently have?
Okay. And we're speaking, just to get one point of clarification, we're speaking about a kind of a diversity of housing types allowed.
I'm talking about that, and to the council member's point, like if somebody were now all allowed to have an office or retail use, they might still build an exclusively office or retail use. They won't necessarily, because the zoning says they're allowed to, make it mixed use.
Right. So I'll answer some of this. Chris may chime in if sometimes he has good thoughts on this too. So essentially when we say creating more mixed use, basically taking most of your commercial districts into mixed use, so allowing for a range of residential and commercial uses. People still build what they want to build. If they just want to build a strictly retail center, that gets built. If they want to build strictly office, that gets built. We have no requirements. Quite frankly, what we're proposing is far more flexible than what's in place now. Your mixed use districts have percentage requirements on things that need to be built. We want to create, say a percentage of office, a percentage of retail, a percentage of stuff like that. We just want to say, hey, this district allows for you to do all kinds of different things. And so you have the freedom to do that. If you just want to build an office tower, build an office tower. We're not getting in your way on that. As you open that up, I think it becomes a more welcoming in these commercial areas, a more welcoming business environment. There's, the freedom to be able to do what you want within the parameters that the district sets. When it becomes easier to open a business and operate a business, you see people beginning to get attracted to these areas. In terms of the housing thing, where we've opened up different districts to different housing types, the answer is we haven't seen anything undergo a massive wholesale change. Typically established single families have stayed established single families, but other areas that are, say, closer to more commercial centers and things like that take advantage of it and do build a diversity of housing types, but it's not an explosion. Anything you really do in zoning is 20 years until you really see a kind of a really big change. And a lot can happen, as we've all seen over the years. A lot can happen in 5 years, much less 20 years. And so it's not like once things get accepted and the district allows for all these different things that neighborhoods undergo wholesale change. We don't see that. We haven't seen that. What we've seen is in areas, we've done some work in other communities where they were doing a lot of things kind of similar to Dallas, approved through plan developments or approved through other types of conditional approvals like a plan development, that those really go away because now we've got the tools in place to just, we know what they want to do has a district that's appropriate for that. And that's really where we see kind of more of the growth happening. Chris, I don't know if you want to chime in.
Yeah, I will jump in. Hi, everyone. This is Chris Jeanette from Camiros. Just to kind of reinforce what Arista said, and kind of the pace of change that we typically see after something like a zoning update, and it really does vary. I mean, I think that the idea is that zoning by itself, in and of itself, doesn't make anything happen. What zoning really does is it sets the rules for what can happen, right? And it allows for a community's local regulations to be able to respond more effectively to market demand in those communities. And markets are different in every place, right? So that's the idea, that they're different everywhere and then they're not static. So that's why it's important to really have zoning that allows for flexibility, allows for responsiveness from the regulatory tool that really controls development within your community to be a little bit more responsive. And to evolve as the city continues to evolve and as the city's vision for the future evolves. So, zoning in and of itself won't result in overnight change anywhere. Oftentimes people refer to it as more of a glacial pace of change. That said, the market is different everywhere, and things can happen at different speeds. We haven't seen anything like Arista said that just explodes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Okay. And here we have Karen.
Thank you. These are easier questions. Well, one question I have is still about these corner stores. And help me if I misunderstand this, but I understand the new state law allows any commercially zoned area can be turned into multifamily. And my neighborhood was built in the 1920s, and there are corner stores, and now we don't have, my understanding is the new parking code allows you to build 20 units without having any parking. And my neighborhood is already undergoing severe redevelopment. I mean, I live in a little craftsman house. The new house around the corner is costing over $1 million. The duplexes are over $700,000 per side. So will this allow people to come in and build up to 20 units without parking on a corner that had a little corner store on it?
No.
Good.
Just very simply, no. The state legislation talks about commercial districts. So the district must be zoned commercially. What we're proposing in the corner store example would be a use within an existing use within a residential district, a use that's been there. The building was built as non-residential. It was your local corner store that you walk down to. That was part of the residential neighborhood. So it would be a commercial use within a residential district. Therefore, the state legislation does not apply to that. And what we're proposing and the way that we would structure this, because again, this is not what we're talking about is not new. We're talking about things that exist right now, would have a series of safeguards built around it to prevent it from getting intense or converting to something to a different type of commercial use that's more intense. But the short answer is no. What we're proposing would not open the door for that.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, we don't have any raised hands right now. Give it a couple minutes, see if anybody wants to raise their hand. All right, we got Cookie.
As I've listened, it seems that with the relaxation of some of these zoning issues that we could end up with the city of Dallas looking very hodgepodge and having no continuity. What are you putting in place that's going to keep that from happening? Because I've seen it happen in the Northeast and other areas where they do not have zoning protections. So what's your remedy for ensuring that we don't end up with the city of Dallas looking like just a conglomerate of everything thrown together?
So really, I think what we're trying to do, I think actually more of a danger in that lies if everything's kind of done by plan development, because plan development will continue to do kind of many zoning codes and many different types of development that aren't consistent because they're not working off one base. what we're really trying to do is capture the character of Dallas, the, some of the policies that relate to land use and development within Forward Dallas, to make sure that within districts things are consistent, and that we're creating, say in the commercial, a scaling of districts that reflect the different scales of development that happen within a city. I think the ability to kind of reform this code and bring things together and be more consistent actually will prevent the idea of there being a hodgepodge of development types and things everywhere. We're trying to organize things, in a more logical manner, so that and in a consistent manner between the districts.
Thank you for your question, Cookie. No more raised hands as of right now. If anybody else has any questions, raise that hand.
Also, we did make the offer available. We've got probably about 15 minutes left here. If somebody wanted to type any question into the chat right now, we will try and answer them. If there's an onslaught of them, hopefully we will get to your question, but feel free to type something into the chat. We're going to ask that you retype it if you typed it before, or copy and paste it into this, so because we may miss it if we have to go scrolling back through the chat.
Okay, we have Karen Roberts again. And then we'll get to Audra's question in the chat.
Okay, I wanted to ask, I've been wanting to ask, how much of Dallas have you actually seen? Have you actually driven around or been driven through? And what other large cities have you worked with? I looked up that Illinois place, and it was delightful, but it's not anything the size of Dallas. And I know you've mentioned some other places, but can you give me just a little more information on where you're coming from with looking at us?
Yes, we've been driven around Dallas. That was kind of one of our first key steps. We had staff take us on a series of city tours, also driving ourselves. Also, Mitch on our team lived in Dallas, so is familiar with Dallas as well. So we've been on the ground, kind of driving around looking at things. I pulled examples into the slides of things I thought looked nice and were readable. Palos Park is a community of about 5 people. The intent there is not for it to be analogous. We've worked with multiple big cities. We just recently finished up the Charlotte Code, Charlotte, North Carolina. I've worked in Baltimore, New Orleans, Buffalo, New York, Rochester, New York, Knoxville. Chris, help me out here. Where else have we? Providence, Rhode Island, Chattanooga, Shreveport, Louisiana, Hot Springs, Arkansas, I think I said. Am I missing any of the other slightly bigger ones?
Well, we're coming up with a list just off the top of our head. I think in response to Karen's question, we've got plenty of experience dealing with major cities. And so that's where we're coming from. And we've seen a lot of Dallas, and we've also, benefited from the experience of working really closely with staff who live in Dallas, Mitch, who has lived in Dallas. And, every time we come back in town, we're seeing more and more and more. So we're getting intimately familiar with the city of Dallas the same way that we do anytime that we've got a zoning job in any community.
And to answer the question, yes, I have taken them to the best barbecue spot. My favorite, personal. Okay, we have some questions in the chat here. We have a question. Averaging front setbacks would essentially do away with the continuity of the setback, correct?
Actually, it would reinforce the continuity of the setback, because rather than assigning kind of an arbitrary number, It's not really arbitrary, but kind of a set number, I think is a better way to phrase it. A set number of, say, 15 feet, 20 feet, whatever that is, but allowing people to set back further, or in some cases, you may have historic development patterns that are closer. The averaging provision actually allows the houses that are coming in to develop in line with the others. So it creates a better continuity along the front of the buildings.
And I would add into that too. I think that question might be referring specifically to conditions on corner lots, and sort of a vague provision within the corner within the current code that says something about the continuity of established setback along frontages must be maintained. And that's on our radar. That's something that we're dealing with. We're not proposing to get rid of that idea. I think addressing it in a different way through something like a corner side setback is a much more logical way of dealing with that, tied to something like the front setback averaging provision as well.
Okay. We have a question. How will historic districts be protected from encroachment?
Okay. Well, the issue with historic districts is we are not charged with making any revisions to the regulations that affect historic districts. There's historic district regulations that are in place that are operating. It is not within the purview of our tasks to basically touch those. So how those are working now really would just continue to work. We wouldn't be doing anything that would go against the way the current historic districts are set up.
Okay, no other questions as of yet. No raised hands either.
Okay. Well, then I think we can wrap up the meeting. Again, just to say thank you everybody for coming. Really do appreciate it. If you're wondering what 6 p.m. is, it's this. So you can join us again for another presentation at 6 p.m. Really appreciate everybody taking the time. And thank you all, and we'll be in touch. Also, as Chris said, comments via the website. You can dallaszoningreform.com. Thank you.